Public transit in the US and Canada kinda sucks. It's slow, unreliable, and no one really uses it unless they have no other choice. Usually these problems come from bad land use and poor planning or a lack of funding. But there's also an issue with our attitude towards public transit. To put it simply, cars are prioritized over everything else, and we are scared of doing anything that might disrupt the flow of traffic. So we often sacrifice the efficiency and viability of public transit just to avoid slowing down the cars and getting in their way. One of the best examples of this are Toronto's streetcars, which have a terrible reputation for being slow and unreliable. We've all heard those jokes about being able to walk faster. So many people think streetcars suck, and outdated technology that should be replaced by subways. But when you look at other cities around the world, they have very fast, clean, and efficient tram systems. Trams and streetcars are basically the same thing, they're just different names. They're used by a lot of people and they're very reliable for getting where you need to go. And we can make our streetcars, just as good too, as long as we stop building them the wrong way. In the early 1900s, almost every town and city in North America had a streetcar network, from LA to Chicago and even small cities like Regina, Saskatchewan or Reno, Nevada. America literally had the largest streetcar networks in the world. But in the 1920s, cars started appearing on the streets, causing streetcars to become slow and delayed. By the 1950s, most streetcar companies went bankrupt and some were turned into buses. At this point, the government had basically abandoned all rail infrastructure and was pouring tons of money into highways instead. Now you might think that this was simply out of preference, that Americans just chose to switch to cars because that was the superior choice. But that's misleading. At the time, only a minority of the population had cars, and the streets were already clogged with so much traffic that it was affecting the majority of people taking streetcars. In Peter Norton's book, Fighting Traffic: The Dawn of the Motor Age in the American City, he documents the history of how cars took over our streets. Mass demand for automobiles cannot alone explain the automotive city. Even in the United States, there's little evidence of a love affair with the automobile. In 1920, the very small minority of motorists was remarkably effective in obstructing streets. The real problem was that cars could drive on the streetcar tracks, causing streetcars to get stuck in traffic. On top of that, streetcar companies had to maintain the roads surrounding the tracks, but now they were being driven on by heavy vehicles, causing damage. And they couldn't afford this because they were also forced to have a fare cap. So basically, streetcar companies were forced to help subsidize cars while also having their business sabotaged by them at the same time. So while yes, people did technically choose to drive instead of taking streetcars, but those choices were not made purely out of preference. It was influenced by auto industry propaganda and tons of money being spent on new highways and suburbs, all to make driving the better option. In other words, it was not a fair choice. Streetcars were never the issue, it was the cars that swooped in and clogged the streets with traffic, effectively killing streetcars and thus public transit in North America. This brings us back to Toronto. Toronto was pretty much the only city to keep most of its streetcars, and today it has the largest first-generation streetcar network in North America. But the car-centric mindset had still infected us. When Toronto's first subway line opened in 1954, the main purpose behind it was to replace the streetcars and push transit underground so they could free up space on the road for cars. The chairman of the TTC, that's the Toronto Transit Commission, said at the opening ceremony, "The Yonge Street subway line was not the final solution of Toronto's traffic problems. It is only the start of combating this monster." A Toronto Daily Star article read, "The main purpose of that underground will be to lessen congestion on the streets. The subway can be justified as a central city traffic relief project." So subways, at least in Toronto, weren't about serving transit riders. It was about serving the automobile. This had created a certain ideology in the city that continues to this day. The crack-smoking mayor Rob Ford,
yes, I have smoked crack cocaine,
was known for being a big proponent of subways.
Subways, subways, subways.
Because those stinky streetcars don't belong on the streets.
They don't want these damn streetcars blocking up our city.
The fundamental fallacy here is that streetcars don't cause traffic. Private vehicles cause traffic. I mean, this should be obvious, right? Most people don't care about how they get around. They just want the fastest and most convenient option. People will shape their lives around the best mode of transportation available. If your city is designed for cars, people will drive. And if it's designed for transit, people will take transit. The Downs-Thompson Paradox states that car traffic will continue to increase indefinitely until it becomes faster to take public transit. But when transit gets stuck in the same traffic as cars, no one will take transit if they have the option to drive. This is the exact problem that buses have and why there's such a stigma around them. They're viewed as something only the poor, the desperate, and students use. And this negative perception only makes it harder to improve them. But cars are very inefficient. According to the TTC, a single streetcar carries up to 130 people, while most cars on the road only have 1 or 2 in them. So if you want to improve the traffic, you have to speed up transit and make it a more attractive option. It shouldn't be about moving as much cars as possible. It should be about moving as much people as possible. I feel like some people forget that Toronto streetcars are a mode of transportation that moves real people, like a lot of people in fact. In 2022, the Toronto streetcar system had an annual ridership of over 60 million people. That alone is higher than the entire Bay Area rapid transit system in San Francisco. So while it may be frustrating to have to wait behind a streetcar, at least all those riders aren't driving their own cars instead. Toronto is lucky to even still have streetcars, and if the city really wants to be serious about improving congestion and quality of life, there are many things it can do to improve the streetcars. Watch this car trying to make a left turn, but in doing so it's blocking the streetcar and preventing it from proceeding through the intersection. By the time the car does make its turn, the streetcar hits a red light and has to wait even longer. On majority of streetcar routes in Toronto, cars are allowed to drive on the tracks, causing streetcars to get stuck in traffic. It also wears them out faster. Steel should last longer than rubber tires on asphalt, but all these heavy cars driving on the tracks means more frequent maintenance and construction to repair them. So streetcars really need their own dedicated tracks separated from vehicles. Although, if you ban cars from certain streets, which Toronto really should do, then you don't really need any of this. Another thing that modern streetcar systems should have is transit signal priority. This is where traffic lights at intersections give priority to public transit. You can do this by extending a green light or making a green light start earlier when a transit vehicle is approaching. And this doesn't have to affect car traffic either. If you extend a green light for a streetcar, you're also extending it for other vehicles going in the same direction. And that extra time can then be compensated for the other direction in the next light cycle. But apparently this is too complicated for American traffic engineers because when they hear about extending a green light or giving transit priority, they freak out like, oh no, it's gonna cause so much traffic delay, oh no. And so signal priority is often poorly implemented or just avoided completely. Toronto does have a lot of intersections with signal priority, but it's completely missing from a few key routes, such as Spadina. This is one of the busiest streetcar routes in the city and runs on separated tracks. But we decided not to turn on signal priority here because, well, we could, but we just don't. In fact, cars get to make left turns here before streetcars can go. What's really sad is that even Toronto's big new LRT projects that are about to open will still have very weak signal priority. LRTs should be a step up from streetcars. These are built with dedicated grade-separated tracks and big station buildings just like a subway. They cost billions of dollars and in the case of the Eglinton LRT, took over a decade to build. So their potential is seriously wasted when they still have to wait at intersections like a bus. This is what happens when the people in charge of public transit don't take public transit themselves. Okay, my camera battery just died, so I don't know how much of that got filmed, but anyways, compare this to the trams in Paris, which are very similar to Toronto's new LRTs. Not only are they fully separated from vehicles, but they also pretty much have complete signal priority, meaning they never wait at red lights, even though some lines run through fairly busy intersections and have very frequent service. It's obvious here that trams are built as their own layer of transportation, not just thrown into a system designed for cars. Another small detail with signaling are multi-stage crossings. On routes with center streetcar tracks like Spadina, pedestrians should be able to cross halfway and onto the streetcar stop while cars are making left turns. This is very common in the Netherlands. If there's no oncoming traffic detected, the signal lets you cross halfway. Meanwhile, the multi-stage crossings in Toronto are quite literally stupid. Even when there's no oncoming traffic, I'm not allowed to cross halfway to reach this LRT stop. They're programmed to act like one big crossing even though they're split up into two. And they still have the audacity to put this sign up. Like, once again, this is sacrificing the viability of transit for the sake of cars. Now, speed is not the only important part. What's also crucial is accessibility and user experience. This is what a streetcar stop looks like in one of the busiest intersections in Toronto. Do you see it? It's here. Just a pole with a sign. What would be useful are shelters, level boarding, tactile platform edge markers, screens showing when the next vehicle will arrive, and just more clear signs in general. There's nothing differentiating these from bus stops. For the most part, the experience on the streetcars themselves are fine, but it would be nice to have information screens with actual useful information. Look at how the screen on a bus in Barcelona tells you all the stops along the route and how long it'll take to get there. When you get to a stop, it shows you all the other bus and metro lines you can connect to. Now, there is one thing that Toronto streetcars do really well, and that is integrations with other transit. At a few stations, the streetcar stop is underground and integrated with the subway, allowing for a quick and seamless transfer. Although there is an issue where two streetcars can't fit at Spadina station, so there's always a huge backup in the tunnel, but this should hopefully be fixed soon as there are currently plans to expand the platform. There are so many ways we can improve Toronto streetcars, and many of them can be practically done in days or weeks. RM Transit has a great video talking about these. Streetcars or trams should be a fast, higher mode of transit, as they are in many other cities around the world. They're smoother, last longer, and have more capacity than buses. They can even be faster than subways in some cases, as you don't have to go all the way underground and back up. But in Toronto, we like to focus on building new subways and light rail lines, which, don't get me wrong, is great, but it feels like we aren't taking full advantage of this massive transit system we already have. Like it's literally built already, we just have to bring it to its full potential. Toronto needed a downtown relief line for a while as there's only one subway line going into the city, and so we're currently building this brand new subway. Once again, this is amazing and we need this, don't get me wrong, but here's Toronto's streetcar network. Why haven't we turned one or two of these into relief lines? Instead of waiting decades of construction for new subways to get built, the city could transform itself overnight and for a fraction of the cost. And this starts with a shift in our mindset. To improve transit, we have to prioritize it. Thankfully, the city is starting to have a change of heart. Back in 2017, the King Street Transit Priority Corridor was introduced to give priority to the 504 streetcar, which is the busiest service route in the city, moving 90,000 people per day in 2019. Just for reference, the Line 4 subway moved only 47,000 people per day, and the former Line 3 moved 78,000. So a streetcar line that can compete with subways really needed to be prioritized. The rules are simple. Complicated. It basically prevents through traffic by banning straight and left turns at most intersections. And some on-street parking was replaced by outdoor dining, stop platforms, and bicycle parking. This worked pretty well at first and throughout the pandemic, but throughout last year, travel times have increased dramatically. So much to the point where it was literally slower than before this was all even introduced. This was because drivers constantly broke the new rules. A University of Toronto study found that drivers made nearly 7,000 illegal moves on King Street every day, and 99.7% of that, so basically all of them, were not ticketed or fined. Thankfully, the city started deploying traffic agents to manage the situation, and traffic is a whole lot better. Like, it's kind of surreal seeing a major street in downtown Toronto be so empty even during rush hour. But I don't think manual enforcement is a sustainable long-term solution. I mean, recently a driver literally smashed into a streetcar on King Street, causing it to derail and crash into a pole. And while I was down there filming, I still saw countless drivers breaking the new rules. But I mean, why wouldn't they, right? The rules are confusing, and there's literally nothing stopping them apart from a few signs. Like, look at this ridiculous wall of text at this one intersection. A better way of enforcing this would probably be cameras and automatic ticketing, but this is only enforcement, not prevention. What should be done is changing the surface and the design of the street itself so that it's more obvious to drivers where they aren't supposed to go. Or you can just ban cars altogether and turn it into a pedestrianized street, just like many other cities around the world. Like even Houston, the city known for massive freeways and car-centric policies, has a street exactly like this. Streetcars or trams are not inherently bad. They're only bad because we chose to make them bad. If we want transit to be good, we just have to prioritize it. I've used this quote before, but I'll use it again. A developed country is not a place where the poor have cars. It's where the rich use public transportation.